Thoughts on first edition SKE Blue Eyes. So that is the Evolutions Blue Eyes. I'm not a fan. Those are very often the cards everyone had in their binders. Evolution was so much more printed than everything else. And it's also the Broken Neck Blue Eyes. You know, LOB is getting away with it because it's LOB. But if we are talking from a love for that art perspective, most people spit on LOB. And again, there's some people out there who love it. I think it's cooler than some other arts. But then again, there's far more love for the DDS SDK or Festa art. And so there's just a lot of things working against Evolutions. It's the uglier art, in many people's opinion. It's way less rare. It is not the original. There's a lot of vintage other alternatives out there. So I don't know. I'm not very bullish on it. May it go up? Sure, everything's been going up in these crazy markets. But I'm personally staying away from it. What's the closest you have come to quitting Yu-Gi-Oh? So I have quit Yu-Gi-Oh as a game. Essentially, I started in 2003, maybe 4 with Magic Ruler Starter Deck Pegasus around that time. I then played. All throughout GX I played Dark Arm. I did well at regionals there. I went to nationals, got destroyed. I think Light of Destruction was out at that time. I then kept playing into Teledad format, played with Black Rose, Goyo Guardian, Thought Ruler Archfiend, and so forth. Then I quit XYZs. I didn't care for them. I thought they were stupid. I was like, what the hell is XYZ? Ugh, these weird cards. Oh, I don't want that. Then there was Pendulums. Again, I'm like, what the hell is a pendulum? Fuck that. I don't want to play that. And then I came back into playing the game around Summon Sorceress. So is that 2017 or 2018? Somewhere around that. That is also around the time I bought that sealed starter deck Kaiba. And I've just, you know, casually played. So whenever a format sucked ass in Yu-Gi-Oh, it didn't matter because I had Vanguard to play competitively. So I was never really triggered by any awful formats. Like, I never got Firewall FTK'd because I didn't go to YCSs in the first place. So no real moments of quitting really beyond the moment where I quit right before or around XYZ. Is there a possibility that a new game will unhinge the Magic Pokemon Yu-Gi-Oh trio and that it is interesting to start collecting, in the sense that it is possible to revive a second 2000? So you need to understand that the world is different now. Kids in the 2000s weren't en masse watching Twitch streamers and playing Fortnite the way they are now. And that's not meant in a bad way. You know, every generation just has different stuff they grew up on. And our generation was mostly playing trading cards on the playground. Sure, we also gamed, so that's definitely part of it. That's also why we see some of these vintage video games do great, but it's a very different dynamic. We didn't grow up all with these things and with iPads and MacBooks. And again, now I sound like a boomer. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think that's a great thing. Like, a lot of kids are going to be extremely successful by having all of this information, but it is a different culture entirely. And unless we start seeing kids all play a brand new card game on the playground, we will never have a new 2000. Beyond that, local retail stores as a business model were great back then, but awful right now. So you first need the culture to change, then you need to change the way people, you know, consume entertainment, and then you also need to have the kids growing up playing cards on the playground, and then they need to start going to local game stores, hoping that that business model has changed. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to completely swap before you can have a new 2000, and I don't see that happening. You know, there are other card games who have come up and people have tried to hype them as, oh, this is gonna kill Magic, oh, this is gonna do this, it's gonna kill Yu-Gi-Oh, it's gonna kill Pokemon, and every single time it's been wrong. And we don't know that, you know, we have kind of like a survivorship bias. Most people are like, oh, MTG, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, what if there was a new card game coming up that destroyed them? There have been, and they didn't do well. You know, the number 4 card game is Cardfight Vanguard, and most people have no clue what that is. Then you have your Dragon Ball Super, also doing well. I mean, it's also been a bit on a decline, but you know, that card game, super strong IP, but it's still not touching the top 3 at all. Not even close. You have your Digimon card game, loads of hype. The hype is kinda like lower now, which is weird because we're now around release time. You have your Flesh and Blood, you had Force of Will, you had Wise, you had Argent Saga that's being cancelled, and so there's constantly new card games, and they consistently do not touch the big 3. They never get even close. They don't stand a chance. I hope that they do stand a chance. I hope there's a card game that can actually touch the top 3. I personally love Cardfight Vanguard, but it would be cool to just see that whole culture reinflated, because that only helps, you know. If there's a new card game that actually takes the world by storm, local game stores can start doing extremely well, so there's more people in those game stores, so there's more people trying out trading card games as a whole, so there's more people potentially getting into the other card games that we all love already. that's only good. That's just strengthening the ecosystem. So it's in my best interest from an enjoyment perspective and a financial perspective that happens, but I just don't see it. I do not think we have the catalysts currently to have a new card game actually have the impact that the big three had in the 2000s. If you had to make an unbiased guess on which of the three Blue Eyes will win out in the long run, which would you go with? So it's very hard because a lot of collectible categories are mostly built on heuristics. So purely because people are saying LOB is alpha, LOB is base set, that will automatically have speculators overpay for LOB Blue Eyes no matter what. So if I had to bet on how markets have worked despite any like collector love and fundamentals, I would say LOB. Purely because of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Purely because of heuristics. But then again, if I had to bet on what's actually a more loved card, I would choose DDS or SDK any day. Any day. There's so many people who love that art above all others and remember LOB art. Oh, it's the Evolutions card. Most people just didn't grow up on that art and don't really care. But again, the self-fulfilling prophecy is already working. Now, personally, if I had to buy a Blue Eyes, let's say in October, right, that would mean that people claim the market price around that time was 85k or something after the one PWCC, and then after that Steve Aoki also bought one, so people are saying the market price is 85k. Okay, then I actually think that SDK and DDS were better buys in October, November than LOB. I think the growth on DDS and SDK will be better than the growth of LOB. If we assume that DDS is around 13, SDK was around 10, and LOB was around 85 during that time, I think you will have far better returns. Because I do not believe there are many people willing to pay more than the 85 or even accept that 85 is the actual market price. Whereas I do believe that people will be perfectly willing to pay way more than the 10 and the 13 on the SDK and the DDS from October around that time. So I think come December 2021, if the Yu-Gi-Oh market has just been growing and not retracing, I think you will have seen better returns on DDS and SDK than LOB, assuming those starting prices. But again, you can say those aren't the starting prices, and I would be inclined to somewhat agree, but that's a huge other topic. I think if you say LOB is 85, I think a lot of its growth and hype is priced in because of the heuristics, whereas SDK and DDS have a long way to go still. Now, of course, those can still all grow more, longer term. I'm not like against holding those cards at all. I'm bullish on Yu-Gi-Oh as a whole, but we're really just talking about those percentages. But regardless, you know, getting back to it, unbiased and so forth, if the self-fulfilling prophecies keep working the way they have been, LOB would win purely because of the hype already just re-inflating. I've seen low grades for SDK first edition still sell for 4 figures. What's your opinion on this? Depends what you mean by low grade. In general, I'm very careful around low grades because you basically need two things. You need the actual rarity from the get-go, so not a bunch of commons, and then you need the fact that kids destroyed cards, so it's hard to have minty copies. You need both, because if you don't have the first, if something wasn't rare to begin with, it will be real easy to keep finding minty versions of Andro Sphinx behind here because everyone had it. You know, sure, most people destroyed it, but if you had a population of 1 million, you will still have plenty of high quality cards. So then you get into the second one, kids need to have destroyed it. Because you started with a relatively low population already on first edition cards, and then you lowered that even more with children putting them in blenders or whatever, that means the population is now truly low. However, if you start betting on PSA 4s and 5s, you are essentially saying this card was so rare that it doesn't matter that kids destroyed it because there's still not enough to go around. And I personally, unless we're talking about prize cards where we know there's 50. Doesn't matter if you destroyed it, there's 50. That's less than every set card, there's 50. You know, that's something different, but SDK first edition, the pop wasn't 50. It's never been 50. It's more like 50,000 or something, or even more, I don't know, right? But that is where you need the scarcity created by the condition. So if you're betting on PSA 4 SDK first edition, I don't know, I personally can't get behind that. I do not believe that that is truly rare. But again, might go up. I don't know. If people consistently don't send in their PSA 4 first edition SDKs, or there's really way less out there than I think there are, maybe it keeps going up, maybe it doesn't retrace. I don't know, but personally I wouldn't bet on it. I would not bet on extremely low grades unless we know, okay, this is a prize card, this is a 1 of 1, this is a 1 of 500, something like that. And even 500 is quite high. Do you buy raw cards from the US, ship them to Europe, and then ship them back to PSA in the US? Yes, and it's actually even more funny than that. I buy a raw card in the US, it's shipped to Europe, then I ship it to a middleman, the middleman ships it to PSA, PSA ships it to the middleman, and the middleman sends it back to me. But sometimes I'll also buy in the EU. The big problem is that the older cards have that little E denominator, and that really doesn't help with the value. Now, I do have some of these because I just enjoy the cards and I'm like, value be damned, this is still an LOB first edition or whatever, but generally I do buy from the US. Creating modern Yu-Gi-Oh cards like Starlight and collector rares, is it worth it in the long term? It might be, they're quite hard to pull, but my big fear is twofold. First of all, everyone is now somewhat of a collector, and so Starlight Rare and collector rares really aren't being destroyed like the ultis, the ghosts, to a way bigger extent the LOB, MRD and so forth cards were back in the day. There are no kids currently biting on their Starlight and collector rares quite as much as back then. So while the population is currently low, it's not being lowered as much anymore. And so my fear is that it's very easy to instantly convert the entire raw population into 9s and 10s, just like that. Unless quality control was really shit, like on Ghost Rare Ra. So that's the first issue. The fact that the raws can be converted into mint cards, mint graded cards, just like that. My second fear is that I do not believe there's all that many kids currently growing up on Yu-Gi-Oh! And there's a few, like way more than in Magic at least, but compared to a Pokemon or compared to just kids, you know, in other franchises playing video games, Twitch streams and so forth, there's not all that many kids growing up loving these Starlight and collector rares. There's not many kids sitting in front of TV watching their favorite episode 13 where Joey does a funny thing or whatever, falling in love with these cards. And so 10, 15, 20 years from now, I don't know if there are that many people who are gonna be willing to spend, you know, 10x, 20x the price of these Starlight and collector rares in any similar fashion as LOB, PSV, GX, and maybe even 5D Ghost. Again though, 5D Ghost is a bit of an odd one in the sense that I think the price there is literally because of the scarcity and how hard it is to grade, and not so much that people grew up on it, which means, you know, maybe there's a stronger argument for Starlight and collector rares, but I don't know. So may they go up? Sure. And if you love the cards, you want to put it in your collection? Enjoy, you know, that's just your thing. Some Starlight or collector rares are pretty cool. I wouldn't mind owning them in PSA grade, but from a financial perspective, I'm like, I don't know. I know generally speaking, unlim cards from an investment viewpoint are a big no-no, but what are your thoughts on the EN variants of LOB, MRD, etc.? Now, I know for a fact that some EN variants are way more rare than others. So there might be something there, but it's not the same for all sets. You really can't, you know, paint with a big brush. Overall, I think the fact that it's not first ed will forever not help the price, even though it may be more rare. You know, look at a Shadowless in Pokemon. There are far fewer Shadowless cards than first edition cards of certain cards in that hobby. And yet, the first editions crush the Shadowless insanely hard, despite the scarcity, you know, flipping it somewhat. But people want that stamp. People want to say, I have the first. And so while the scarcity may be there on some EN cards, but not all, people want that stamp. So I don't know, you know, in the end, it's very possible that Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole keeps going up and that you throw with a dart at any card and maybe that any card will have gone up, you know, that's possible. That's what it's been like so far. But assuming that the market matures in a way and some things correct down and others correct up, it's not something I feel super comfortable with betting on financially. However, given that some of these cards are very cheap, might be great for just collecting and having fun with. Have you ever been to a major Yu-Gi-Oh event like YCS, SJC, PT? So yes and no. Like I said, I have competed in regionals back in the day and won, but that is not the same level as a Shonen Jump or a YCS. So I haven't been to those level of events, but I have done pretty well at like one tier below that, the regional level. That was back in the Dark Arm days. But I do really want to go to a YCS because I want to meet the voice actors and have stuff signed and have that whole experience. Why are EU English cards not as valuable as US cards? Because most collectors are from the US, the grading companies are from the US, and so again, those heuristics, those self-fulfilling prophecies start in the US and get their power in the US. Now, it's very possible that people start going, well, I can no longer afford LOB US, so now I look to LOB EU. Or you have European collectors who are like, well, I didn't grow up on LOB US, I'll go for LOB EU. So that's a possibility, but so far it hasn't been the case, and the self-fulfilling prophecies are making the US cards worth way more. Not Yu-Gi-Oh! / investment related, but I stumbled upon your music channel. Shit's dope, bro. Thank you. What bands have you been listening to in 2020 and 2021? Oh man, that's hard. I'm gonna just go into my Apple Music. So I've been listening to Bring Me the Horizon, Red, Nightwish, All That Remains, Architects, As I Lay Dying, Asking Alexandria, The Black Dahlia Murder, Bring Me the Horizon Again, Crown the Empire, Disturbed, Eskimo Callboy, From Ashes to New, Falling in Reverse, Motionless in White, Panic at the Disco, Skillet, Thousand Foot Crutch, Wild Ways, Neil Acree, which is like a really great composer. He does the World of Warcraft music. Fallout Boy, 3 Days Grace. I hope that gives a pretty good picture, you know, a lot of rock, a lot of metal, but also just smaller bands. I often talk to pretty big bands because of Solemn Tones, and also like mid-tier bands, so you know, the type that does tour the world but doesn't sell out arenas. And so I often listen to that music as well, maybe give input. Sometimes the Solemn Tones user will send me their music and I'll enjoy it. Maybe they'll ask input and I'll say like, oh, you know what, you should try turning up the guitars there, or using a little bit of an effect there. And then if the song is real good, I maybe like jam it a few more times. So that also happens quite a bit. And if you want to check out my music, you should check out Maxim Solemn, Melody of Death, and Maxim Solemn, Breathe Fire. Breathe Fire was together with Franz from Attila. I actually enjoy Attila a lot as well. It's more of fun party music, but maybe you're into it. You should also check out Maxim Solemn, Should Have Known Better, if you like singing stuff over screaming stuff. Next, do you see an opportunity in Yu-Gi-Oh! Misprint market? Yes and no. There's a lot of misprint collectors and people who will pay premiums for misprints, but that is very, very niche. You know, if you have the pie, let's say we make a pie of all the Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans, and then a sliver of that is Yu-Gi-Oh! Collector, and a sliver of that is Yu-Gi-Oh! For specific eras, like Vintage, you have your GX, your 5Ds, other eras, and then you have your misprint collectors, and then in all those subsets, you have collectors who are able to pay a lot. You are really, you know, taking a sliver and a sliver and a sliver and a sliver and a sliver, and the misprint sliver is much smaller than these other slivers, and then you need to take the subsection of misprint collectors willing to pay a lot. So, you know, you're really making your sliver smaller and smaller, and so the odds of finding someone willing to overpay for a certain card or pay more, you know, it's a bit of an odd one. Now, some misprints are so iconic and so rare, like for example a Jinzo jar, that there's definitely some interesting stuff going on there. You know, there's very big tiers in misprints. You know, there's people who go, oh, well, this is reverse foil. That's not really a misprint. There's people scraping off the names with a coin and going, oh, look, it's a misprint. There's people, you know, with foil shifts, and there's people with off-center stuff, and those really aren't the same caliber of misprint as maybe Faded. And again, is Faded misprint? But then you have your highest misprint. This card is a half a Celtic Guardian and a half Mystic Elf, or this card is a Jinzo jar. Again, that's such a different level. And there's definitely something there, but just saying misprint, you know, that's a really broad brush that I don't like to use in this regard, because the difference in price is huge. And betting on a no-name card compared to some other thing that's way more expensive and thinking that they are the same thing just because they're misprints, that's a dangerous game. Do you see a strong correlation between Bitcoin's price and Yu-Gi-Oh's price? We already covered that in this Q&A. If I split this video up into different parts, maybe you should check out part 1, because we're already, wow, 50 minutes in, that's crazy. Does the recent price increase for BGS create an even bigger backlog for PSA? I think it does. I think a lot of people in the huge PSA price hike and backlog and all that crazy stuff because of all the demand started going, you know what, I like BGS. I'll go to BGS purely because the price difference and the wait time was different. But now that BGS upped their prices to the same or higher than PSA, it's like, well, might as well go for the company where my cards will usually fetch a higher premium and go for PSA. So it's very possible that PSA will now get an even bigger backlog because of that. Not by a huge margin, not like, whoa, 50%, but you know, a solid sliver again. How will the upcoming new grading company, the grading house, affect the current Yu-Gi-Oh market? I don't know. I don't want to shit talk anyone creating a new business, because that's amazing and we should absolutely have competition that drives innovation, that makes it so PSA has to try harder, BGS needs to try harder, CGC does their thing. You know, that's great. However, as I've stated on this channel a few times already, people pay for a label because they have a strong name. They trust those cards to go up because PSA cards have gone up for decades. You know, people know a PSA sports card has sold for multi-millions, so now my PSA card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon might one day fetch a high price as well and adds that premium. And I trust PSA despite their issues, and I trust BGS despite their issues. But even BGS sometimes doesn't touch PSA in terms of prices because PSA is that much bigger. So now if you take a company that is really a little tiny tadpole in comparison to these, well, this megalodon or this mega whale, and then BGS the shark, and then you have your little tadpole. I don't know if there will be proper premiums on these slabs if people, you know, specifically pay because it says PSA. There's plenty of grading companies like in Australia and other stuff like that that do not have premiums because they aren't PSA or BGS. And so that's a real fear I have with new grading companies. It's possible you send in your cards and they just don't really go up much because it's not in a case that people already know. Now, I do hope that they do well. You know, that'd be amazing. It's cool to have more options and competition, like I said, but I'm careful around those. I do not think they will really move the Yu-Gi-Oh market much, if at all, because they're just not big enough yet. But maybe years down the line they will be, and that'd be cool.